Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Holiday Break Activity Kit series. My name is Landon Calderwood, and I am the Youth Outreach Coordinator for the West Pottawatomie County Extension Office. Today, I took a field trip back to my kitchen for our activity, Bread in a Bag and Homemade Butter. For our activity, you will need 2 cups of all-purpose flour divided into 1 cup increments, 1 package of quick-rising yeast, 3 tablespoons of sugar, 1 tablespoon of non-fat dry milk, 1 teaspoon of salt, 1 cup of hot water, 3 tablespoons of vegetable oil, 1 cup of whole wheat flour, and heavy whipping cream. To make your bread in a bag, start by opening up a 1-gallon size baggie. To your baggie, add 1 cup of all-purpose flour, 3 tablespoons of sugar, 1 tablespoon of non-fat dry milk, and 1 teaspoon of salt, and 1 packet of rapid rise yeast. Once you've added all of your ingredients, shake it all down to the bottom and press out all of the air in your bag. And then seal it across the top. Once you've made sure that it's sealed, you can go ahead and start to shake up your bag to mix in all of those dry ingredients. Once everything's all mixed together, your dry ingredients should look like this. It should be a pretty consistent looking powder. After all of your dry ingredients are mixed together, add 1 cup of hot water and 3 tablespoons of oil. Just like before, try to squeeze as much air out of the bag as possible and seal it at the top. Once you've made sure that your bag is sealed all the way, start mixing in those liquid ingredients with all the dry ingredients. Once your dry and liquid ingredients are all mixed together, add 1 cup of whole wheat flour to the mixture. Once that's added, same process as before. Squeeze out as much air as you can from your bag and reseal it. And once you've made sure that it's sealed, start to incorporate that flour into the wet ingredients. Once you've added the whole wheat flour, you'll be able to see a dough start to form and pull away from the edges of the bag. Once the whole wheat flour is all mixed in, we can see that our mixture is still very sticky. To this mixture, gradually add your remaining 1 cup of all-purpose flour and work it into the dough. Once we've finished mixing in that last cup of all-purpose flour, we're going to make sure that we have a nice clean surface and sprinkle some flour across that work surface. Next, take the dough from your bag and remove it onto that nicely floured work surface. Once we have it on our work surface, we're going to turn it through the flour just a few times to get all the sides nice and floured up. Make sure to get some flour on your fingers so your hands don't stick to the dough. And then once we have our dough all nice and our fingers all nice and floured up, we are going to knead the bread for 2 to 4 minutes. Kneading the bread stretches out the gluten that is formed from our flour with all the liquids that we mixed in. To knead the bread, we're going to pull the top of our bread towards us, and then using the palm of our hand, this part of our hand, we're going to push forward, just like that. And then once we've done that, we're going to pick our bread up, turn it, and we're going to pull the top up and down and push. So we're going to continue that process for 2 to 4 minutes. Once your dough is all nice and kneaded, you can form it into a ball just like this, and the surface should be nice and smooth. Next, we're going to get a bowl and grease that bowl either with cooking spray or some vegetable or olive oil. Make sure to get all the sides and the bottom. Then we're going to take our dough, and we're going to stick it in upside down, and then flip it over, just like that. Once our dough is in the bowl, we're going to cover it with a towel and let it sit for 10 minutes. You may be wondering why we use 2 different kinds of flour to make our bread. Here's a quick overview of what the differences are between the 2 flours that we used. One of the major differences between these 2 flours is the percentage of protein. Whole wheat flour contains 14% protein, where all-purpose flour contains 10 to 12% protein. Whole wheat flour contains all 3 parts of a whole grain of the bran, endosperm, and germ, where the all-purpose flour only contains the endosperm of the whole grain. Here's a quick experiment to give you a visual of what the differences in gluten are between these 2 flours. To show the differences in gluten development, I made 2 simple doughs, one using all-purpose flour and one using whole wheat flour, by just adding flour and water. Once the doughs are finished mixing, we can clearly see a color difference in both of them. The whole wheat flour is much darker because it includes all 3 parts of the whole grain, whereas the all-purpose dough only includes the endosperm. To show the differences in the gluten, I washed away the starches in both doughs by rinsing them in running water. The water turned very cloudy while all the starches were being washed away, and once all the starches were gone, the water turned clear again, and we were left with how much gluten was left in each of the doughs. Once we've washed away all of the starches, we are left with 2 very different types of gluten. In the all-purpose flour gluten, it's very light in color because it only uses the endosperm of the whole grain instead of the bran and the germ together like the whole wheat flour. When we go to stretch the all-purpose flour gluten, it rips apart very easily. We can get a nice sheet, but it tears. And so that tells us that, yes, the gluten is there, but it's not going to hold a very firm structure. With the whole wheat flour, we can see that it's a lot darker because it includes all 3 of the pieces of the whole grain, and we're able to stretch it to get a very nice sheet in all directions, and it doesn't tear as easily as the all-purpose flour does. So when we combine these 2 types of flour with these 2 different types of gluten, we can get a bread product that is going to be very firm, yet still very tender for us to use for sandwiches or toast or whatever we would like to use our bread product for. Once our dough has had plenty of time to rise, it may look something like this. As you can see, it's grown a lot since I put it in the bowl the first time. To get it out of the bowl, we're going to punch down and get some of that air out, and you can see that it starts to shrink. And then this is why we greased our bowl, so that it doesn't stick to the edges, and it just comes right out of the bowl. So this next part is going to be forming a loaf, or whatever we would like to make out of this yeast bread product. I'm going to be putting my bread into this pan, and so there are a few different ways that I can do that. One of the easiest ways is to look at your dough and look at your pan and start to shape it into that length and width so that the loaf fits nicely in the pan. We're also going to go ahead and grease our loaf pan, both the bottom and sides. And then take our loaf, our bread dough, make sure that's the right size, and make sure that we have the top side that's nice and smooth facing up. So our bottom might be tucked a little bit, but we want to try to squish some of those together. Make it nice and smooth and shaped, and set that into our greased tin. Again, we are going to cover this and let it rise for about 10 to 20 minutes. Let's look at another way that you can prepare your bread loaf. For this one, we're going to lightly flour our surface again. Make sure to spread that flour out with your fingers. Then we're going to take our dough, put it down in the flour, dust that bottom again, and flip it over. And then we're going to take a rolling pin and roll out our dough so it's as long as this side of the bread pan. Once you have your dough rolled out like this, you can either roll up the dough as it is or add some fun fillings. For this one, I'm going to make a cinnamon sugar swirl bread. So I'm going to take a mixture of cinnamon and sugar and just sprinkle it on the surface of my bread. Once I have a nice coating of cinnamon sugar, I'm going to take one end and start to roll. Once my bread loaf is the correct length, I'm going to take some water and just dip my fingers in there and turn it over to the seam of the bread. So right here, where the end meets up, and I'm just going to rub some water along the edge. This is going to help us connect this long edge of dough together. And so I'm just going to use my fingers and pinch the dough together just like that. So the water kind of acts as our glue. Sometimes you might just need a little bit extra water to get it all connected. Once that seam is all connected, I make sure that it's the same length as my loaf pan. I'm going to go ahead and grease my loaf pan just like I did the other one. And place the loaf right into the pan. Once it's in the pan, just like the other loaf, I'm going to take my towel and cover it and let it rest for 10 to 20 minutes. Once our 2 bread loaves have finished rising, we're going to put them in a preheated oven. Our oven should be set to 375 degrees Fahrenheit, and we're going to bake them for 25 minutes or until they're done. We'll know that they're done because when we tap on the top or knock on the top, it's going to sound a bit hollow, or you can use an instant read thermometer, and the inside temperature should be 190 degrees Fahrenheit. While we wait for our bread to bake, this is a perfect time for us to make our homemade butter. To make our butter, take your container of heavy whipping cream and a paper towel or napkin and wrap it up in that paper towel or napkin. This is to make sure that nothing splatters anywhere if our lid is loose. Once you have it all bundled up just like this, you're going to start shaking your heavy whipping cream every which way, upside down, sideways, any way that you can until your arm gets tired, and then switch. And we're going to do that for almost 20 minutes. Once you're about halfway through making your butter, you're going to start to not really hear much of the cream jumping around. And when you open and look at your cup, you can see that it's very light and fluffy. Although it's changed from how we've put it in the cup to begin with, it's not quite butter yet. We've made whipped cream right here, so this is something that you could put on your ice cream or maybe a pudding or any other dessert that you might serve with whipped cream. So we're going to put our lid back on, wrap it back up in our paper towel, and continue shaking. After you feel like you've been shaking your butter forever, you're going to start to feel a little ball form in your cup, and you might start to feel it jumble around while you're shaking it, and you may even start to hear some liquid shaking around also. When we open up our cup, you can see that we have a nice little ball of butter that has formed, and then a liquid around it. That product is called buttermilk, which we can use to make other products in the kitchen, like buttermilk pancakes. After about 40 minutes in the oven, my bread loaves were ready to come out. I tested them quick with a thermometer to make sure that they read at least 190 degrees Fahrenheit. Once you've made sure that your bread loaf is done, use your oven mitts to turn your bread out onto a wire rack to cool. It is also a good idea to use a paper towel and some of the butter, even maybe some of the butter that you just made, and you just get some on your paper towel and spread it across the top of your bread loaf. Give it that nice shine. Once you've allowed your bread some time to cool, use a serrated knife to slice through your bread. A serrated knife is just like a regular knife, but also just like a saw. It has teeth, and those teeth help cut through the tough crust, you can hear that, it's kind of tough, of the bread, and make sure that you don't squish your bread. Make sure that it keeps its shape, just like this. So this loaf right here is our cinnamon swirl loaf. So I'm going to saw back and forth with my serrated knife. See how it keeps the shape of the loaf? And let's see if we can see our cinnamon swirl. And there we go. You can see it's still steaming a little bit, but you can see how we rolled our loaf up just like that, and see the cinnamon swirl right in the center. And then this is our regular loaf that we didn't have to roll up just like the other one. We just kind of shaped it into a ball and put it in the pan. And it looks You can see that it's just all one shape. It doesn't have that spiral like this loaf does when we spiral cut it, or when we spiral rolled it. Once your bread is ready, there are so many different ways that you can serve it. Today, on my regular loaf of bread, I'm going to use a red raspberry rhubarb jam and just spread that over the top of it. I could even toast this in my toaster to make it nice and crispy to eat for my morning breakfast. And then on my cinnamon swirl bread, I'm going to use some of that butter that we made earlier and spread it over the top. And my bread is still warm, so I can see that the butter is already starting to melt into all the cinnamon. And there you have it, your delicious loaves of bread.